Hello, and welcome to English Story Lab. This is part 3, the final part of our World War II story. In the first 2 parts, we saw how Hitler came to power, how Germany invaded Poland, and how much of Western Europe fell under German control. Now the story continues in Britain. Before we begin, please subscribe to English Story Lab, follow the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next stories. Before German soldiers could cross the English Channel, Germany had to control the skies. Britain was in great danger. France had fallen, and most of Western Europe was under German control. Britain still had its navy, its air force, and many soldiers, but it was standing almost alone. Hitler hoped that Britain would agree to peace, but Winston Churchill refused. He told the British people that the country would continue to fight. Britain began to prepare for a possible invasion. The German invasion plan was called Operation Sea Lion. German soldiers would cross the English Channel and land in southern England. But first, Germany needed to defeat the Royal Air Force, or RAF. The German Air Force was called the Luftwaffe. It had many aircraft and experienced pilots. The RAF was smaller, but Britain had modern fighter aircraft such as the Hurricane and the Spitfire. Britain also had radar. Radar stations along the coast could detect German aircraft before they reached Britain. This gave British commanders time to send fighter pilots into the sky. Britain could use its smaller air force more carefully. The air battle began in the summer of 1940. At first, German aircraft attacked ships in the English Channel. Later, they attacked ports, radar stations, and airfields in southern England. When German aircraft appeared on radar, sirens sounded at British airfields. Pilots ran to their planes and took off within minutes. The battles in the sky were fast and dangerous. German bombers flew in large groups and were protected by fighter aircraft. RAF pilots tried to reach the bombers before they arrived at their targets. Both sides lost many aircraft and pilots. Some British pilots were very young and had little time to rest. Britain also received help from pilots from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries. The Luftwaffe also suffered heavy losses. British pilots who escaped from damaged aircraft could often return and fight again. German pilots who came down over Britain could be captured. By August 1940, some British airfields were badly damaged. The RAF was under great pressure, but it continued to fight. British factories built new aircraft, and damaged airfields were repaired quickly. Hitler had conquered much of Europe, but he could not defeat Britain in the sky. Germany did not gain control of the air, so Operation Sea Lion could not safely begin. But the battle was not over. Germany changed its targets. The Luftwaffe began to attack London and other British cities. The next stage of the war would bring the fighting directly to civilians. Instead of attacking only airfields and military targets, German aircraft began to bomb London and other cities. This period became known as the Blitz. The word Blitz came from the German word Blitzkrieg, which meant lightning war. The attacks began in September 1940 and continued for many months. German bombers often came at night. They attacked London, Liverpool, Coventry, Birmingham, and other important cities. At night, people heard warning sirens. Families quickly moved to shelters. Some stayed in small shelters near their homes. Others went underground. In London, many people slept in underground railway stations because they felt safer there. Life during the Blitz was difficult. Houses were destroyed. Factories were damaged. Roads and railway lines were hit. Fires burned through city streets. Rescue workers searched for people under damaged buildings. Many civilians were killed or injured. Thousands of families lost their homes. Children were often sent to the countryside to keep them away from the bombing. People carried gas masks and prepared for attacks at any time. But Britain did not surrender. Factories continued to produce aircraft, weapons, and supplies. Firefighters, doctors, nurses, and volunteers worked through the night. After each attack, people cleared the streets and repaired damaged buildings. The British government used radio broadcasts to keep people informed. Winston Churchill continued to speak to the nation. He told people that Britain must remain strong. His speeches helped many people continue through the fear and destruction. Germany hoped that the bombing would break British morale. Hitler believed that the British people would become tired and demand peace. But this did not happen. The attacks caused great damage, but Britain continued to fight. At the same time, the Royal Air Force remained active. British pilots still defended the skies. The Luftwaffe could not destroy the RAF, and Germany could not safely begin Operation Sea Lion. By the spring of 1941, Hitler began to look in another direction. Britain had not been defeated, but Hitler believed that Germany could first win a major victory in the East. His next target was the Soviet Union. Hitler had signed a non-aggression agreement with the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin in 1939. But Hitler had never planned to keep this agreement forever. He wanted land, food, oil, and other resources from the East. He also hated communism and wanted to destroy the Soviet state. For months, Germany secretly prepared a huge invasion. On June 22, 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. The operation was called Operation Barbarossa. It was one of the largest military invasions in history. Millions of German and Axis soldiers moved across a very long front. Tanks, aircraft, and soldiers attacked from several directions. At first, the Soviet forces were surprised. German troops moved quickly. They captured large areas and surrounded many Soviet soldiers. Cities, villages, and railway lines fell under German control. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were captured. The German army moved toward three main targets. One group moved north toward Leningrad. Another moved through the center toward Moscow. A third moved south toward Ukraine and its important farmland and resources. At first, it seemed that Germany might win another fast victory, but the Soviet Union was much larger than the countries Germany had already defeated. The distances were enormous. German supply lines became longer and more difficult to protect. Trucks and tanks needed fuel, food, ammunition, and repairs. Roads were often poor, and movement became slow. The Soviet army also continued to fight. New soldiers arrived from other parts of the country. Factories were moved east, away from the German advance. They continued to produce tanks, aircraft, and weapons. As the Germans moved closer to Moscow, the weather changed. Heavy rain turned roads into mud. Later, winter brought extreme cold. Many German soldiers did not have enough warm clothing. Engines stopped working. Weapons froze. Soldiers became sick and weak. The Soviet forces were also suffering, but they were better prepared for the winter. In December 1941, Soviet troops launched a counterattack near Moscow. The German advance stopped. For the first time, the German army had failed to take one of its main targets. Hitler had opened a huge new front in the east. Germany was still fighting Britain, and now it was also fighting the Soviet Union across thousands of kilometers. The war had become much larger, but another major event was about to change it again. In December 1941, an attack in the Pacific would bring the United States into the war. Until then, the United States had supported Britain and other allied countries with weapons, food, and supplies. However, it had not officially entered the war. At the same time, Japan was expanding across Asia and the Pacific. Japan needed oil, metal, and other resources for its army and industry. Its leaders wanted to control more land, but this created growing tension with the United States. The United States placed economic restrictions on Japan and stopped important supplies, including oil. Japanese leaders believed they could not continue their military plans without these resources. Japan decided to attack first. Its main target was the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Japanese leaders hoped to destroy American ships and aircraft before the United States could stop them. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor with little warning. Bombers and fighter planes attacked ships, airfields, and military buildings. Several battleships were sunk or damaged. Many aircraft were destroyed on the ground. More than 2,000 American military personnel and civilians were killed. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt spoke to the American people. The United States declared war on Japan. A few days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. The war was now truly global. Germany, Italy, and Japan were the main Axis powers. Britain, the Soviet Union, the United States, China, and many other countries fought together as the Allies. At first, the Axis powers still appeared very strong. Japan quickly captured many places across Asia and the Pacific. German armies controlled much of Europe, and Axis forces were still advancing in North Africa and the Soviet Union. But during 1942, the situation began to change. In June 1942, Japan planned to attack Midway Island and destroy more of the American fleet. However, American officers had learned important parts of the plan. The United States prepared an ambush. American aircraft attacked Japanese aircraft carriers and sank 4 of them. The Battle of Midway was a major defeat for Japan. It lost ships, aircraft, and many experienced pilots. Another turning point came in North Africa. German and Italian forces moved east toward Egypt. Egypt was important because of the Suez Canal, a major route for ships, supplies, and oil. British forces built a strong defensive position near El Alamein. In October 1942, they began a major attack. After heavy fighting, Axis forces were forced to retreat. At almost the same time, a much larger battle was taking place in the Soviet Union. In the summer of 1942, German forces moved toward Stalingrad. The city stood near the river Volga and had important factories and transport routes. Hitler also wanted it because it carried Stalin's name. The fighting became extremely violent. German aircraft bombed the city and soldiers fought from street to street and building to building. The German army captured much of Stalingrad, but Soviet forces continued to resist. In November 1942, the Soviet Union launched a large counterattack. Soviet forces attacked the weaker Axis armies protecting the German sides. They broke through and surrounded more than 200,000 German and Axis soldiers. Hitler ordered the trapped troops to remain in the city. He promised that aircraft would bring food, fuel, and ammunition. But the Luftwaffe could not deliver enough supplies. Winter arrived, and the soldiers had little food, medicine, fuel, or warm clothing. German forces tried to rescue them but failed. In February 1943, the remaining German forces in Stalingrad surrendered. It was one of Germany's greatest defeats. By this time, the war was beginning to turn. Japan had lost a major naval battle at Midway. Axis forces were retreating in North Africa. Germany had suffered a terrible defeat at Stalingrad. For the first time, Germany and Japan were losing major battles. The Allies were no longer only trying to survive. They were now preparing to attack. The next stage of the war would bring Allied forces back into Europe. They would attack Italy, land in France, and begin the long advance toward Nazi Germany. The next stage of the war brought Allied forces back into Europe. After winning in North Africa, British, American, and Canadian troops landed in Sicily in July 1943. The invasion caused a political crisis in Italy. Benito Mussolini was removed from power, and the new Italian government began talks with the Allies. In September, Italy left the war. However, Germany quickly sent soldiers into Italy. German forces controlled much of the country and rescued Mussolini. Italy became a new battlefield. The Allies moved slowly north. Mountains, rivers, and strong German defensive positions made the fighting difficult. Battles such as Monte Cassino caused heavy losses. At the same time, the Soviet army was pushing Germany back in the east. After the German defeat at Stalingrad, the Soviets won another important battle near Kursk in 1943. Germany could no longer begin a major attack in the east. Soviet forces continued moving west and recovering land that Germany had occupied. The Allies were also preparing a much larger operation in Western Europe. They planned to cross the English Channel, land in France, and open a new front against Germany. The plan was called Operation Overlord. For months, soldiers, ships, aircraft, tanks, food, fuel, and ammunition were gathered in Britain. The Allies also tried to confuse Germany. Fake military units and false radio messages made German leaders believe that the main landing might happen near Calais. But the real target was Normandy. Bad weather delayed the invasion for one day. Finally, General Dwight D. Eisenhower ordered the operation to begin on June 6, 1944. Before sunrise, thousands of ships crossed the English Channel. Aircraft filled the sky, and paratroopers landed behind German lines. Allied soldiers landed on 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. American forces landed at Utah and Omaha. British and Canadian forces landed at the other beaches. At Omaha Beach, the fighting was especially heavy. German guns fired from strong positions above the beach. Many soldiers were killed or injured before they could move forward. Despite the losses, the Allies created a strong position on the French coast. More soldiers and equipment arrived in the following days. The fighting in Normandy was slow and difficult, but Allied aircraft attacked German roads, bridges, and railway lines. This made it hard for Germany to move supplies and reinforcements. By late July, the Allies broke through the German lines and began moving quickly across France. French resistance groups also helped by damaging railway lines and collecting information. In August 1944, Allied forces reached Paris. The city was liberated on August 25th. Crowds filled the streets and French flags appeared from windows. The Allies continued toward Germany from the west. At the same time, Soviet forces advanced from the east. Germany was now fighting on 2 sides. In December 1944, Germany launched one final major attack through the Ardennes. This became known as the Battle of the Bulge. At first, the Germans gained ground, but they did not have enough fuel, soldiers, or aircraft. The Allies stopped the attack and pushed them back. In the east, Soviet forces moved through Poland and toward Berlin. By April 1945, they had reached the German capital. Hitler remained in a bunker under Berlin as the fighting came closer. On April 30th, 1945, he died in the bunker. Berlin surrendered soon after. Germany officially surrendered in May 1945. May 8th became known as Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. People celebrated across the Allied countries. After almost 6 years, the war in Europe was over. But the fighting had not ended everywhere. Japan was still fighting in the Pacific, and the final months of the war would bring even greater destruction. Japan was still fighting in the Pacific, and the final months of the war would bring even greater destruction. While Europe celebrated victory, American and Allied forces continued moving toward Japan. The Pacific War covered a huge area of ocean and many islands. The United States used a strategy called island hopping. American forces captured important islands and used them as bases for the next attack. Japanese soldiers often defended these islands until the end. Many refused to surrender, which made the battles very costly. In February 1945, American forces attacked Iwo Jima. Japanese soldiers fought from tunnels and caves. The United States captured the island after more than a month, but both sides suffered heavy losses. Soon after, Allied forces attacked Okinawa. The fighting lasted almost 3 months. Japanese aircraft carried out suicide attacks against Allied ships. These pilots were known as kamikaze pilots. The losses at Iwo Jima and Okinawa made American leaders fear that an invasion of Japan would cause many more deaths. American aircraft were also bombing Japanese cities. Large parts of Tokyo and other cities were destroyed, but Japan still refused to surrender. The United States had developed a new weapon called the atomic bomb. It was created during a secret program called the Manhattan Project. On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Much of the city was destroyed in seconds. Tens of thousands of people died immediately, and many others later died from injuries and radiation. Japan did not surrender. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and attacked Japanese forces in Manchuria. On August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The city suffered terrible destruction, and many thousands of people were killed or injured. Japan's leaders now faced an impossible situation. Their cities were being destroyed, and the Soviet Union had entered the war. On August 15th, the Japanese emperor announced that Japan would surrender. The official surrender took place on September 2nd, 1945, in Tokyo Bay. World War II was finally over. The war had lasted 6 years. Tens of millions of soldiers and civilians had died. Many cities across Europe and Asia were destroyed, and millions of people lost their homes. After the war, the full horror of the Holocaust became clear. Nazi Germany had murdered around 6 million Jewish people. Millions of other people were also persecuted, imprisoned, or killed. Nazi leaders were later placed on trial in Nuremberg. These trials showed that leaders could be held responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The war also changed world politics. The United States and the Soviet Union became the two strongest powers. Tension between them soon created a new period called the Cold War. In 1945, countries created the United Nations to support international cooperation and help prevent future wars. This brings us to the end of Part 3 and the end of our World War II story. We followed Hitler's rise, the invasion of Poland, the fall of France, the Battle of Britain, Pearl Harbor, Stalingrad, D-Day, the fall of Berlin, and Japan's surrender. World War II ended in 1945, but its effects continued for many years. It changed borders, governments, societies, and millions of lives. Its history reminds us of the terrible cost of hatred, dictatorship, racism, and war. This brings us to the end of Part 3 and the end of our World War II story. We began with the problems that followed World War I. We saw how Germany became weak, how Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party gained power, and how Europe slowly moved toward another war. We followed Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 and the rapid attacks that followed. Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France were defeated. Britain continued to fight, and the Royal Air Force stopped Germany from gaining control of the skies during the Battle of Britain. The war then became much larger. Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and the United States entered the war. Fighting spread across Europe, North Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. The victories at Midway, Alamein, and Stalingrad changed the direction of the war. The Allies began to push the Axis powers back. In 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy on D-Day and began to free Western Europe. At the same time, Soviet forces advanced toward Germany from the east. Berlin fell in 1945. Hitler died, and Germany surrendered. The fighting continued in the Pacific until the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered in September 1945, and World War II finally ended. The war lasted 6 years and became one of the largest and most destructive conflicts in history. Tens of millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives. Cities were destroyed, families were separated, and millions of people lost their homes. The Holocaust showed the terrible results of racism, hatred, and dictatorship. World War II changed borders, governments, and the balance of power around the world. The United Nations was created, and the United States and the Soviet Union became the two strongest global powers. The effects of the war continued long after the fighting ended. Thank you for following our 3-part World War II story. We hope this series helped you improve your English while learning about an important period in history. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to English Story Lab. Turn on notifications so you do not miss our next English story and educational video. Keep listening, keep learning, and see you in the next story.